You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Again, when you think of migrants, especially in the United States, what we often think of the migrants' everyday food is usually the celebration food of the old home, of the old country. Because when people leave a place and go to a new place, they're usually poor and they struggle. Yeah. But once they get their footing and start to prosper, they remember the good times food of the old country or back home. And so they eat that on a more regular basis because it's a sign of status, right? It's a way to feel good.
As Adrian Miller just noted, the flavors of home can imprint upon us, regardless of where we physically find ourselves. So it begs the question, do the physical boundaries of where we live actually shape who we are? When we dig deeper, long histories of communities reclaiming their power through food emerge. So to better understand that crucial connection between food and identity, for today's episode, we went back into the HRN archives and discovered what makes us, well, us. I'm Taylor Early, and this is Meat and 3 on HRN.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
One meat, 3 sides.
Food, news, and storytelling.
A square meal. For your ears.
Meat and 3.
Food is a key part of family histories. Recipes are often passed down through handwritten note cards or cookbooks. But how does one record their food traditions when it's illegal for them to read and write? In our first story, Taylor Graham examines the origins of soul food and how enslaved Black folks preserved this special cuisine.
During American slavery, enslaved people were given a few ingredients to prepare their meals. However, this limitation ultimately established cornbread, baked mac and cheese, fried chicken, and other soul food recipes. In 2021, HRN's Artie Menon sat down with Adrian Miller, the soul food scholar, to discuss how enslaved people did much more than make do with what was available.
Slaveholders were doing everything on the cheap, so 5 pounds of some starch, cornmeal, rice, sweet potatoes, a couple of pounds of smoked, salted, dried, or pickled meat, usually pork, and a jug of molasses. So enslaved people had to figure out how to supplement their diet.
The preservation of soul food itself also faced challenges. With anti-literacy laws prohibiting enslaved people from learning to read and write, publishing a cookbook for many was practically out of the question.
We know in our looking at the publishing history of our country, African Americans were not often afforded the opportunity to publish books that got out to a wide audience. And in the early days, some of the earliest cookbooks, you'll see a preface where the African American author is basically asking for permission or giving reasons why they were allowed to make this book.
So rather than putting pen to paper, some enslaved people turned to memorization. Over the years, I've noticed that this is more common in my family. While we don't necessarily have written family recipes, everyone has their signature dishes memorized to the T. This includes my eldest cousin's baked mac and cheese, my grandpa's cornbread dressing, and my mom's sweet potato pie. And thankfully,
soul food is a mix of celebration food and kind of everyday food.
Which means I don't have to wait until Thanksgiving to eat my aunt's southern potato salad. Although considering my questionable cooking skills, it may be best that she writes the recipe down for me.
For many Americans, there is nothing that roots them to a particular food. This land was populated by immigrants who brought their distinct cultural cuisines, and it was populated by the folks who were brought here against their will with their flavors of home. And lest we forget, in most of the country, indigenous food traditions were assimilated or erased, and only preserved in tight-knit communities. From these tensions and actions, a whole new sociocultural landscape was created. So how do we define our food future? What is American cuisine today? To answer these questions, Bean Metcalf looked back at a conversation between Linda Palacio and Paul Friedman on A Taste of the Past.
The open question that I see within your question that the future will perhaps determine is the farm-to-table movement going to revive regional cuisine?
Hi, hello. My name is Bean Metcalf, and I don't know what to eat. My great-grandparents were immigrants from various parts of Europe. My grandparents grew up on the East Coast, my parents moved to the Southwest, and I live in Oregon. We're scattered around different regions. We don't have any culinary heritage, and I've never cooked with my grandma. And if I'm a modern American, what is American food? What is my food?
It's tough to really, I think, align a particular food or a particular taste to being strictly American. They're all, as you said, invented traditions or bastardized dishes of another cuisine, a foreign cuisine. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, you can't tell me that spaghetti and meatballs is Italian.
Ooh, I love spaghetti and meatballs. But maybe American food isn't one flavor or item that unites us across regions. Maybe it's something that roots us to our particular spot in this country. Which is why I love working at the farmer's market. Being so intimately involved with the food of this place has given me a deeper connection than I ever could have imagined. For me, Oregon doesn't have seasons so much as it has flavors. Juicy wild blackberries in the summer, or the wild mushrooms of fall. It's crazy to me how much we've lost this concept of eating the things that grow all around us. Today, most of our food is sold in supermarkets where there aren't even seasons, let alone regional identities.
Oreos are the same,
right?
All over the place. And
right.
In fact, if you walk into a supermarket, you will not know what region you are in, but you don't know whether the Whole Foods is in Florida or in the state of Washington.
So how do we revive regional cuisine? How do we find our identity in food? For me, it comes back to my regional food community. Because our connections to place don't just come from food, they come from people. So go to your local market, find something delicious, share it with someone. And maybe while you're eating, you can ask them, what does American food mean to you?
Perhaps the best way to discover your place in the world of food is to grow your own. I certainly think so. So, what happens when we build systems that empower children to learn about and guide their own food choices? Alice Waters tested this theory when she created the edible schoolyard at a Berkeley middle school in 1995. Jessie nicely looks back at how this legacy has impacted her life through an interview with Alice on Inside Julia's Kitchen.
And I said, oh my God, it's a garden. It's a beautiful garden.
I grew up in Berkeley and had the privilege of experiencing the original edible schoolyard at MLK Middle School. I can see now how much that hands-on learning shaped my culinary identity and interactions with food. Most kids don't have much control over what they eat at home, so having a safe and supportive environment to explore in can be crucial to the development of their relationship with food.
Students absolutely become engaged with food when they learn how to cook it in a kitchen classroom.
In the edible schoolyard, we were trusted to use knives, cook on a hot stove, and pull plants straight from the garden. While it certainly wasn't the same as working on an actual farm, it allowed even the most unruly of students to take ownership of something and work collectively towards a shared meal.
It's teaching about nourishment in a deep way. And these students really understand it.
In 2001, I was in 6th grade, and No Child Left Behind was forcing schools to rapidly standardize education. The industrialization of food had already created a huge distance between consumers and their food sources. People didn't know where their food was coming from, and if adults had no idea, then the kids definitely didn't stand a chance. Schools were following a similar path towards singularity and industrialization. We were being pushed, like our food, into a system that was focused on efficiency and output.
It's sort of one size fits all. And we are not really engaging the students in a way that's meaningful and empowering for them.
Having a garden to escape to was crucial in helping us maintain our identities and community. While nurturing the garden, we could grow our own skills and find our place within a collective.
Cooking and gardening are such beautiful places to feel empowered because you're able to choose a seed, to plant it, to see it grow.
Since its founding in 1995, the Edible Schoolyard Project has expanded to include over 5,800 programs across the country. The programs focus on meeting children at their level, and educating them about ingredients and food practices helps prepare them for the real world. It doesn't hurt that lesson comes with a side of fresh, delicious food.
We'll be right back with more Meat and Three after a brief break.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
We're back and heading to the South to continue the conversation about identity, place, and food. In season 15 of Meat and Three, we celebrated the Black women and femmes leaving their mark on the culinary world. They really put the heart and soul into soul food. And the best part of a soul food spread? There's always room at the table. For our next story, Huynh considers how a new generation of diverse voices is reimagining the South. As Andre 3000 proudly said, the South got something to say.
As refugees, my family and I escaped our homeland after the Vietnam War and made the American South our home. Though we fled one war, we found the South had its own complicated history, rooted in slavery and the oppression of people of color. And I often wondered, if the South can't even accept its own people, how could it possibly accept me? In Lenny Sorensen, a multi-hyphenate African-American chef and culinary historian, I discovered a kindred spirit. She's found a way to carve out her own space in the South.
I knew very well that so much of American agriculture, especially in the South, had been done by Black people, enslaved Black people. And yet that didn't seem to be reflected. But as I farmed, while I was out milking cows and cooking on wood and chopping wood, I realized those were all activities that Black people, enslaved and free, had been doing for a couple hundred plus years. And how could that story be told?
I have often grappled with how to tell my own family stories. Fleeing Vietnam, we left with nothing. I see how my lack of access to family history is mirrored for Black Americans whose ancestors were denied the right to record their own lives.
To me, the food, I just wanted to focus on what did people have to know how to do? And then what did they do? Because they didn't leave necessarily journals and letters. I have to do a bit of, feeling about what they would feel about it.
For Therese Nelson, the founder of Black Culinary History, she's found a way to make her voice and the voices of those who came before her heard.
You have to sort of divorce yourself from thinking that you're going to be able to find linear stories in our culture. But food, because of its universality and because of its sort of core humanity, allows us to fill in gaps that are intentionally or sort of subliminally left out.
In order to forge a new South, there's no denying that more work needs to be done to question and dig deeper into long-held assumptions of what it means to be a Southerner.
It was actually a very gradual process. I had always been an aggressive reader of history. I really dug that, and I dug my own family history.
So I'm planting my seeds from one South, that of South Vietnam, to the American South. It took a really long time for me to acknowledge that my voice could be included. And we all got something to say.
And we want to hear it. For our last story, we're checking in with Kia Damon as she revisits an episode of Meat and Three as well. Kia's peeling back the layers on the origin and impact of Southern barbecue, both in America and in her own family.
I think there's two types of American barbecue. There's the one that you do in your backyard, which is hamburger and sausages, hot dogs, which is simple. But there's also the south part of United States that brings the barbecue to a whole new level.
That's Chef Paulo Shen of Coma, a Korean-Brazilian restaurant in São Paulo. He's right in noting that Southern barbecue culture can't quite be compared to, let's say, your uncle's hamburgers at the birthday party. Believe it or not, Southern barbecue can actually be traced back to the early 17th century, and like most Southern traditions, it could be linked to the history of chattel slavery. There's a record of the original pitmasters being enslaved Africans. Writer Amira Henry digs deeper into this piece of history in her article, Roots in Culture, The Black History of Barbecue. She says, usually the person manning the pit was someone with a lot of cooking experience and someone with enough strength to manage the large animals being prepared. Low and slow cooking, meat smoking, and whole hog roasts are practices that survived the transatlantic slave trade. They've been passed down from generation to generation, resulting in a co-cultural American culinary staple. I'm also fondly recalling a day I spent in Asheville with my friend and peer, Chef Silver, a Filipino Southerner and owner of Nang Juniors. I stood in his yard drinking tea while he periodically bathed these pork butts in some kind of a vinegar marinade, a technique he learned from his early days as a pitmaster that nods to Estonian-style barbecue. It's pretty cool. The moment was a true testament to the distance foodways can travel. Being a Black Southerner with Gullah Geechee roots, I see the colonial origins of barbecue in my own family. Take my uncle, for example. Every year, I look forward to when he drives up for family gatherings. See, 48 hours prior, he's already got his ribs seasoned. And then with his smoker in tow, he makes his way up to the get-together, the house where everyone's staying at. But come the day of the event, he's up at 4 a.m. starting the fire. He tends to his fire with this unwavering focus until one of us older nieces or nephews wakes up to relieve him for breakfast. Honestly, it's a communal pursuit that's worth all of the effort.
There's something about, gathering around a fire. I think every culture has. So I think that's why it's very easy to people to assimilate.
As a child, I used to whine about the smell of smoke and how long it'll take to gnaw on a morsel of pork rib. But as a grown woman with a deep love for my Southern heritage, I can celebrate barbecue for what I now know it to be. It's a gift from the ancestors, proof of their enduring contributions to American culinary history.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. I hope these stories gave you something to chew on. Learn more about the guests and topics we touched on this week by checking out our show notes. This episode of Meat and Three was reported by Taylor Graham, Bean Metcalf, Jessie Nicely, Huynh, and Damon. Our lead producers on this episode were Jessie Nicely and Bean Metcalf. Our executive producers are H. Conley and me, Taylor Early. Meat and Three is engineered by Sam Gerardi. Our theme song was composed by Breakmaster Cylinder. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Meat and Three is powered by Simplecast. Meat and Three is a production of Heritage Radio Network, the world's pioneer food radio station. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org and follow us at heritage_radio and at meaty.gram. And please stay in touch. Whether you have a story idea or just like to say hey, write us at ideas@meat3.nyc, and that's all spelled out.